Let's just recap on the main points before proceeding. So, what do we know about tardigrades, more commonly known as water bears? Well, we've seen that they are aquatic organisms which resemble microscopic, transparent, eight-legged bears and are seen as probably the most endearing of microorganisms. But they do not necessarily live in the sea or freshwater bodies. They can also occupy water pockets in land moss, beaches, and even soil. Tardigrades can vary in size, ranging from 0.1 to 1.5 millimeters, and are made up of just over 1,000 cells, which grow in size rather than multiply. There are around 600 confirmed species, and their lifespan may vary from 3 to 30 months, depending on the environmental conditions. There are some striking differences between them and other invertebrates, the first one obviously being their appearance, which is extremely bear-like. Another one is movement. They move slowly, whereas the majority of invertebrates tend to dart around. Most of these have a simplistic form, unlike the tardigrada, which have an anatomy and physiology similar to macrofauna, which, if you remember, is the terminology used to describe larger creatures. Take, for instance, their general anatomic structure. They have a well-defined head with rudimentary mouthparts, a segmented body which is divided into 4 parts with 8 short stubby legs, each ending in rather lethal-looking claws. The hind legs are fitted with backward-facing claws, unique to this particular organism. These are used for grasping objects and propulsion in water, but are unsuitable for walking. On closer examination, we can see that they also have a basic alimentary canal, which means that they are able to eat and excrete and possess inner organs such as a brain, stomach, and ovaries which store eggs for reproduction. There is no circulatory or respiratory system, but other than that they can feed, mate, and fight like any other full-size mammal. So what makes these microscopic creatures so special? They are some of the smallest and yet toughest creatures on our planet. The tardigrade can survive in environments which would prove deadly for any other species. To prove this point, scientists have even carried out detailed research in deep space, where they experimentally subjected them to intense ultraviolet radiation, and still they returned to active life. The terrestrial or land-based tardigrade have proven to be the toughest out of all of the species, as they are subjected to the most extreme conditions. The reason behind this is that they are able to go into a cryptobiotic state, by which I mean that their bodies are able to go in a dormant state and then come back to life when the conditions are suitable. These are truly fascinating creatures which have been known to remain in that dormant state for over 125 years. Revival typically takes a few hours, depending on the length of time that they have been exposed to the conditions. So how do they do it? Well, let's take a look at the tardigrade in some very different environments. Firstly, let's analyze their reaction to extreme heat. As I mentioned before, these organisms thrive in water, but if by any chance their water source should dry up, as long as it is over a prolonged period of time, tardigrada are able to dry out almost completely, taking on a dry, shrunken state which is called a tun, retaining only 3% of their body moisture. Even more surprising is the fact that they can survive in temperatures of up to 303 degrees Fahrenheit. This may seem to be impressive, but it is only just the beginning. They are just as effective at shielding themselves against the extreme cold in the Arctic tundra. In test conditions, they have displayed considerable resilience, surviving temperatures of minus 328 degrees Fahrenheit. In the same way, they form a ton of protection, but there are also other factors which come into play. The freezing process is a gradual one, and as they begin to freeze, they produce proteins which disrupt the formation of ice crystals, thus making it possible for revival with thawing. Despite the radical changes which occur in their metabolism, they seem to be none the worse for their transformation. Now, let's examine how the tardigrade reacts to extreme salinity. In this kind of environment, the tardigrade
Good morning, everyone. I've been invited to talk to you about computer-controlled driving by your department. It may seem a bit of a cliché, cars that can drive themselves. You may also think that it could only happen in the movies, but in truth, it's more science and less fiction than it was, say, about 20 or 30 years ago. As you can see from your ever-evolving phones and computers, technology never stands still. In fact, it has made tremendous progress over the last few decades and is continuing to do so. Okay, now, one of the milestones in life, apart from becoming a homeowner, is owning and learning to drive your own car. The latter can often be a stressful experience, to say the least. There are many of us who have had to endure the stress of taking a driving test, not only once or twice, but even 3 or 4 times. We may find ourselves spending a great deal more than we originally intended to. So, why go to all this trouble? Well, the answer is simple. We no longer regard the car as a luxury, but a necessity. As an integral part of our lives, it would be unthinkable for many of us not to own one. And yet, driving and the problems related to it are one of the most frequently cited sources of stress. What if you didn't have to drive anymore? What if the car was programmed to do it for you? You could just sit in the car and do anything that you wanted without having to keep an eye on the traffic. Impossible, I hear you say. Well, not anymore. To illustrate, the first driverless, vision-guided, robotic van appeared on the roads of Munich in Germany as early as the 1980s. At this time, the vehicle was still guided remotely using a system of internal cameras. Nevertheless, it managed to reach speeds of up to 100 kilometers per hour on empty roads. As you can imagine, this was seen as a significant technological advancement by the automotive industry, and subsequently, in the same decade, the European Commission set up a fund for the development of autonomous cars. But it wasn't until the 1990s that the technology was present to take it that one step further. In 1997, the American military built a fleet of autonomous vehicles which successfully navigated both off-road and through city traffic near San Diego. And in 2007, Google also jumped on the bandwagon, manufacturing a fleet of 7 cars which have traveled 140,000 miles on public roads with next to no human intervention, and without requiring any additional road infrastructure, which would be both costly and time-consuming. So, if that's the case, you may ask, why aren't there more of these on the road? Obviously, they are still in the preliminary stages of testing, and have to be completely roadworthy before they are sold on to the public. Complex driving legislation and procedural bureaucracy means that they have to undergo a series of stringent tests, which have already taken decades. What do these tests involve? Well, obviously both the software and hardware would initially have to meet strict criteria, and are nowhere near reaching this point yet. Let's take the example of Talus, a car which was designed and built for the DARPA Urban Challenge competition staged in 2007. During preliminary tests, Talus had a near miss with another vehicle at a junction when it was distracted by sensor noise, which means that it temporarily lost track of the other car and started to move forwards into its path. This incident proves that these sensory signals, which are the basis for their navigational system, are still no substitute for good old common sense, and there is a lot more testing to be done. So, what would the impact be on our lives if we no longer had to drive? Well, of course, it is impossible to predict this exactly. But information gathered from market research has provided us with some indicators of how people might react to the introduction of an autonomous car. As you might expect, there were conflicting reactions, some being more positive than others. First, let's take a look at some of the more positive ones. One of the things which drivers find the most frustrating proved to be finding a parking space. Whether they wanted to go to work or do the weekly shop, they complained of having to spend far too much time trying to park. Advocates of the new technology claim that the autonomous car can be programmed to drop you off, find a parking space, and then pick you up at a prearranged time, eliminating both the stress involved in finding a parking space and the need for hiring a taxi. Sounds fine, unless something unexpected crops up. These cars aren't designed to cope with the unexpected. Let's say you are delayed for any reason, or you decide not to take your car. What happens then? Another thing which we can be pretty certain about is that in the current climate of rigorous health and safety checks, especially pertaining to anything mechanical, the autonomous vehicle will be far safer than if they were being driven by humans. You may ask how I can make such a bold assumption on such limited evidence. Well, it goes without saying that humans are being dictated by their emotions, and in day-to-day life they are often subjected to conditions which put them under extreme stress. So, in real terms, this means that their performance is liable to fluctuate depending on both internal and external factors. Take, for example, a man who's just had a heated argument with his boss and is late for an important appointment. It is highly unlikely that his performance on the road would be as good as if he had left the office in a good mood. As humans, we are prone to tiredness, lapses of concentration, illness, and even inebriation whilst driving, all of which lead to accidents, and in many instances, fatalities. This is obviously not so with computerized cars. In fact, some recent car models which are on our roads today have already been equipped with driver-assistive systems, such as forward and side collision alerts to inform the driver of a possible accident, adaptive cruise control, which maintains a steady distance between your car and the one in front, etc. According to statistics in the United States, 1/3 of deaths in young people between 15 and 24 are caused on the roads. The statistics in the UK reflect the same pattern, with the highest mortality rate being amongst children and young people between the ages of 10 and 24. Overall, though, the number of fatalities throughout the UK reached 2,222 in 2010, admittedly a dramatic improvement on the previous years, making Britain one of the safest places in Europe for road safety, a commendable achievement, but still representing a terrible waste of life nonetheless. These statistics obviously do not include the ones who survive and are hospitalized, and all in all, it's bound to put a strain on the national health system. So the onus on the autonomous car is to bring that figure down significantly. One thing you can be sure about: if more computerized cars are on the roads, car insurance will certainly be impacted upon, especially if accidents became a thing of the past. The premium will most likely go down, something which, with things as they are, is unlikely to happen in the foreseeable future. But what would happen if even with 1,000,000 to 1 chance there was a malfunction? The consequences would be dire, as all cars would be locked together in a close formation, moving at the same speed and with an equal distance separating them, each vehicle moving predictably. On a high-speed freeway, it would take only one car playing up to cause untold damage. Now, I'd like to turn to some of the more negative viewpoints of
Listen to the interview with the psychologist who studies dreams. Then choose the best answer. Look at the questions now. Now we shall begin.
Now, could you tell us more about what you do in your department? I mean, what research are you actually doing at the moment?
We're trying to find out as much as we can about dreams. There's one area that we're particularly interested in at the moment, and that is what we call directed dreaming.
Directed dreaming? What is that exactly?
Let me explain. You know, sometimes, if you're having a dream and you wake up in the middle of it, you can sometimes go back to sleep again and go back to the dream.
Yes.
Well, that is similar to what we call directed dreaming. Now, what I was talking about is a fairly common experience, but real directed dreamers are people who have always complete control over what they dream because they actually know what they're dreaming.
They can dream what they want?
Yes, nearly.
Can anyone develop this ability?
Well, that's one of the things that we would like to find out. At our centre, we have in fact got 3 people who are very reliable and who can have these directed dreams quite regularly.
And what sort of experiments do you do with them?
Well, a few weeks ago, we thought it would be interesting to see if there was any way that these 3 regular dreamers could communicate with each other in a directed dream while they were sleeping. So one night, we arranged for them all to stay at the centre. Then we asked the 3 of them, there were 2 men and a woman, we asked them all to go to a pub that they all knew quite well, down by the river, and asked them if they started dreaming to go down there and try to find each other.
In the dream? Or 3 dreams?
Yes, so they all went off to sleep, and the next morning we interviewed them all separately and asked them what they had seen. The 2 men had had dreams and could remember them, and they both said that they had been to the pub and had seen each other and had had a talk. But also, both of them said that they hadn't seen the woman, and we thought that was a bit odd. And then we talked to her, and she told us that she hadn't had a dream at all that night, or she couldn't remember it anyway.
Fascinating. So both of the men said she hadn't appeared in their dreams, and that was because she hadn't in fact been dreaming.
Yes, though of course it could just be a coincidence, but that's the kind of thing that we're trying to find out more about.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Border. It's been fascinating talking to you.
Thank you.
Welcome to the latest episode of Film Finest with me, Liz O'Donnell. The films I'll be reviewing in this episode are What Happens in the Night, the new horror film by acclaimed director Jan de Nijberg, and Happy as Larry, a new romance comedy starring Harrison Wyatt and Sonia Smith. Let's start with What Happens in the Night. Set in a convent school in the 1950s, this film tells the story of 2 boys who are haunted by apparitions of monks. The film has the feel of a comic book, as it's shot in black and white with occasional shots of vivid color. De Nijberg, the director, said he wanted some elements to stand out, and he has used color to do it. I would say quite effectively. He claims his inspiration for the film is his own experiences growing up in 1950s Liverpool. A believer in ghosts himself, he thought he saw ghosts in his school years. Ghosts or not, this film is certainly haunting. What Happens in the Night is a film that will scare you. I wouldn't say it's the best horror film to come out this year, but it's certainly shot beautifully. And it's not hard to follow. So, unlike some recent horror films, you don't have to sit in dedicated concentration for 2 hours trying to keep up with a complex plot. An enjoyable film. I would give it 4 stars. In Happy as Larry, Sonia Smith and Harrison Wyatt play 2 people who fall in love but cannot be together because of their families. The build-up to the film has certainly been epic, with gossip about both co-stars in the papers. Rumor has it that Smith and Wyatt aren't the best of friends. In fact, on the set, they barely spoke to each other. I have to say, though, this doesn't come across in the film, and they look like a great couple. Happy as Larry is a move away from the usual films Sonia makes. She is better known for her roles in action films, but she has shown herself to be a capable comedy actress. However, I'm not sure this is the finest film to do it in. Both men and women alike can get something from this film, but the romance angle is overplayed, and the laughs are few and far between. If you want romance, this film is fine, but if you want comedy, I would recommend seeing something else. I would give it 3 stars. Now, there are some new video releases which are gonna be coming out in the next month.